Today, I want to talk about your circadian rhythms and the importance of the circadian rhythm in health on from various angles. And so when I create a plan for people that I'm working with, oftentimes sleep strategies are part of that plan, because in a society like ours, we typically are going too hard for too long, and we give lip service to sleep, but we don't actually follow through on that lip service. So I just want to rehash with you guys today the importance of the circadian rhythm, meaning the light-dark cycles, and how that can potentially impact our health in a positive or negative way. So if you don't mind just going on mute while I'm teaching, and then we'll unmute it for questions. So Janine, I'm going to mute you if you don't mind. And good. Okay. So before I dive into the various studies, what I want you to understand is that the circadian clock, or the circadian rhythm, evolutionarily for the human species, is based on the light-dark cycles of the sun. And so if you think about our hunter-gatherer ancestors, they basically went off of sunrise to sunset. At sunset, they'd light a fire, do some dancing and whatever various tribes did, and then motor down and go to sleep. And so even though they may have been awake beyond sundown, they weren't awake in artificial blue light, okay? The light they had was a fire. And so it was orange light or red light. It was lights that do not activate the sympathetic nervous system and do not keep you up. Contrast that with us. Sun goes down, we're under artificial lighting in our homes, maybe LED lighting. We are watching iPads or iPhones or TVs or computer screens, which are blue light. And the research has shown that blue light activates the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response. So as the sun goes down, our body has what are called clock genes and a circadian rhythm and melatonin release and all these things you've probably heard a little bit about before, hopefully. And those things should be kicking in at sunset to help motor us down towards sleeping. But if we're looking at the screens, we are keeping ourselves awake, we're keeping our nervous system awake, we're releasing cortisol, and we are not motoring down. And so we may not have as restful sleep as we should, which leads to poorer healing and recovery. We may have issues falling asleep, we may have insomnia, we may have anxiety. There's lots of potential issues. So we want to, as best we can, when the sun goes down, turn off the screens and or wear blue light blocking goggles and or operate, at candlelight or however wild you want to go, okay? So very important to entrain ourselves with the light-dark cycles of the sun, because that's how we evolved, so to speak. And I say evolved from a scientific standpoint in terms of how our genes and our bodies operate, not necessarily in a biblical term. So how might this impact our health? Well, this study right here was in Frontiers in Immunology in 2018, and it's entitled "The Circadian Clock Drives Mast Cell Functions in Allergic Reactions." So some of you, this may be very interesting, because some of you have what are called Th2 immune phenotype dominance. Or if you remembered when we talked about your immune system and how if we make it very simple, it looks like a seesaw or a teeter-totter, right? And if let me draw for you, that will be more fun. If we draw a seesaw like this, and we put T helper type 1 cells on this side, those are our antiviral, anti-infection cells. If our cells get infected, the Th1 response ramps up to engulf those cells and kill them, and thereby kill the infection that's inside them. On the opposite end of the seesaw or teeter-totter, we can put Th2 cells. The Th2 immune response is the pro-allergy, pro-histamine, mast cells response, okay? Anywhere we have mucus, gut, lung, sinus, bladder, that's where the Th2 response occurs. Cortisol will drive up that Th2 response. Okay, so will coffee, so will various other things. And so just like if I'm on the seesaw on one side and you're on the other, if I go up in the air, the other side has to go down, right? So if the Th2 response is dominant or Th2 is up in the air, then we're also reciprocally inhibiting our Th1 response. So if we're constantly allergic, constantly histamine, constantly hives or EpiPen type responses, allergies, asthma, sinusitis, bladder infections, eczema, those sorts of things, then we may also be chronically infected because we're constantly inhibiting our anti-infection warriors. Okay, so why is that important? Well, mast cells here are part of the Th2 response. So the circadian clock drives mast cell functions in allergic reactions. So your sleep can impact how your immune system is functioning. Well, why? Because look at this. This is sleep, and we put 8 a.m. at the XY axis interface, and we put 8 p.m. further down the x-axis. Then when we are heading to sleep at night, melatonin's ramping up. Oh, I'm sorry, I mixed it. Let's make this 8 a.m. further down the x-axis and 8 p.m. at the xy corner there. All right, so at 8 p.m. we're motoring down for sleep, so melatonin should go up. In the middle of the night it's the highest, and then it should be low at 8 a.m. Okay, so that's melatonin. If we map it next to cortisol, cortisol should be lowest at night when the sun goes down, so we're not being kept awake. And then it ramps up to be highest in the morning to form what's called the cortisol awakening response to wake us up. And so both these hormones, melatonin and cortisol, have immune impacts. Like I said a moment ago, cortisol promotes a Th2 response and melatonin promotes Th1 response. So you could say you're your best killer or your best fighter in terms of intracellular infections at night around 1 to 2 a.m. Okay. So if we're not sleeping well, if we're not getting those important hours before midnight, then we may not be the best killers we can be. And if we're staying up late and looking at screens, the cortisol rhythm could be messed up so that the cortisol is higher when we're trying to go to sleep. So we have more trouble going to sleep. We're insomniacs. We may wake feeling unrested, or we may wake up we may have trouble waking up, or we may be slow starters in the morning. And so cortisol rhythm ties into cortisol melatonin response in this way as well. Well, specifically immunologically, let's look at how the circadian clock impacts allergies. So this study says circadian rhythm impacts mast cells. Mast cells are the cells of your immune system that make histamine. So if you have histamine responses, they're involved. And you can see here that when light hits the eye, there's a part of the brain that recognizes that. And then all this stuff happens at the genetic level, involving clock genes and other things tied to your circadian rhythm. And those responses impact cortisol release and other factors that impact mast cells and whether they're going to release histamine or not. And you can see down here that when they're releasing, mast cells tend to release more histamine at night and less during the daytime. So if you have a mast cell driven disorder or a histamine pro-allergy driven disorder, a Th2 dominance, you may notice that symptoms are worse at nighttime, especially if your sleep cycles are dysfunctional. So part of, oftentimes I'll work with people and they're like, well, just give me the supplement that I need to do to knock this out, or just tell me the food I need to avoid to feel better. Well, those things are important, but remember, it's a whole puzzle, or it's a whole lifestyle. So if you're doing the supplements perfectly and you're doing the food perfectly, but you're not getting the healing that you want, and you're staying up late and not putting the iPad down, etc., well, the impacts of the blue light from the devices, or the impact of you staying up too late beyond midnight before you go to sleep, maybe shifting that Th1, Th2 balance, promoting a Th2 prohistamine response and not allowing you to heal the way you want to. So your sleep and circadian rhythm directly can impact your immune system and healing in that way. Another way, your liver function. So this study was in Nature Reviews Gastroenterology, and basically they're talking about circadian rhythms of liver physiology and disease. And you can see I highlighted in red here, controlling the timing of food consumption and food composition, a concept known as chrononutrition, is one area of active research to aid recovery from many physiologic dysfunctions. So basically how we time our food and what the food is made up of impacts our healing, which isn't rocket science, right? Or isn't really breaking news for us, but the breaking news part might be the timing impact in terms of when you're eating throughout the day. Many people will eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, and that's not, that's not groundbreaking. But often people will then eat snack and dessert and things later into the night and not realize the impact that that has on your blood sugar, the impact that has on your sleep, the impact that has on your liver. And so studies have shown that, we can prevent or reverse obesity by changing the timing of our eating and how what that food is made up of from a macro and nutrient standpoint. You can impact cancer risk in this way. Shift work impacts you in this way. And so, again, timing, wake, sleep cycles, light, dark cycles. We want to eat in a way that our hunter-gatherer ancestors did. So they would eat in the daylight because they would have to go capture their prey or pick berries and tubers. And they generally did that in the daylight. So they would pick it, capture it, eat it in the daylight. Nighttime, we're sleeping and recovering. So that's how you can impact liver healing from a chronological circadian rhythm standpoint. And then lastly, everyone loves the gut, right? The microbiome, the probiotics, the good bugs, the bad bugs. This study is very interesting. It was in PLOS1, circadian disorganization alters intestinal microbiota. Check this out here. So these authors wanted to see, does circadian rhythm disruption impact the gut microbiome? And so they studied mice, and what they said was, in the present study, a model of chronic circadian disruption was used to determine the impact on the intestinal microbiome. Male mice underwent once-weekly phase reversals of the light-dark cycle to determine the impact of circadian rhythm disruption on the intestinal microbiome, and were fed either a standard chow diet or a high-fat, high-sugar diet to determine how diet influences circadian rhythm-induced effects on the microbiome. Weekly phase reversals of the light-dark cycle did not alter the microbiome in mice fed standard chow. However, if they were fed an American diet, high-fat, high-sugar, in conjunction with phase shifts in the light-dark cycle, they had significantly altered microbiota. So if you eat the standard American diet, which is high-fat, high-sugar, low-nutrient, and you live the standard American lifestyle of staying up too late, watching Netflix, getting up early and dragging yourself to work, that tended to impact the gut microbiome. So as we've covered many times, the gut microbiome is involved, has its little fingers or tentacles in everything, right? In liver health and brain health and systemic inflammation and immune system function and digestion and autoimmunity. So this is a study on mice. It hasn't been proven in humans yet, but you could see how it's probably the same, right? And if we take indirect studies like the circadian rhythm impact on liver, like we just saw, circadian rhythm impact on immune system, shift work studies on nurses that work overnight and the effects of cortisol there, would probably be pretty much the same thing in humans. So if we're doing all this work to heal our gut, because we've read 8,000 blogs that say that's the thing we want to do, but we're staying up late to read our iPad to read those blogs, then we're working against our healthy gut goal and our healthy probiotics. And if we're doing that while eating Ben and Jerry's, it's compounded, okay? So I hope this makes sense and rings a bell with you guys. And I hope none of you are living that lifestyle. You're all living the right lifestyle. But I just wanted to reinforce this for you. And let's open it up for questions now. Or comments.
It
Shout
just
it out.
reinforces what we're supposed to be doing. So huge.
Yeah.
To sleep. Sleep is so good.
Yeah, it is. It is. This morning I woke up to work out, and it was before the sun came up, and so there was this awesome storm going on. I'm like, oh, that sounds so good. I just want to stay in bed, but I didn't. I got up, but it is important, and I couldn't have got up the way I wanted to if I had stayed up too late, right? So it doesn't just. There's another study I should pull up here, but you guys get it. It doesn't just impact you that day. It impacts you for a couple days at least, and it impacts brain function, so your performance at work. It impacts your inflammatory levels. It impacts everything. So, gotta sleep.
Yeah, the last few days I was like in a total funk. And then the last 2 nights, I really was intentional about going to bed earlier in preparation for Cora's plan starting tomorrow. And I just, like, my attitude, everything did such a 180. I was so much more happy and content today after a lot more sleep.
Yeah, and so now what you want to do is build consistency into that, right? Because that's one day, but if we could stack days together, we do so much better. And this is that study I was alluding to a second ago, sleep and inflammation, partners in sickness and health. And I won't bore you to death with it, but basically there's 2 great charts here. This one shows you healthy sleep, and healthy sleep's, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, anti-COVID, in the periphery. And then from a brain standpoint, it's anti-brain inflammation. So, if we're dealing with MS or brain inflammation, we want to sleep. Healing, all of that. So that's the good one. If it's bad, you're more socially, you're more stressed, you're chronically inflamed, sleep disturbance, more open to bacterial and viral infections, more open to Alzheimer's and depression and everything else. And so again, we don't want to just give it lip service. We want to implement it and incorporate it and do it, because we get returns fairly quickly. And then if we're building consistency, we get long-term returns.
100%.
Rebecca, what did this say to you? Anything?
Oh, this was like my report to the T. But I'm just thinking right now, I mean, like, school is so stressful right now because we're face-to-face, but we're trying to prepare in the event you have to go virtual. And so we're trying to double duty. We have some kids remote, some kids face-to-face. And I'm working 10-hour days. Like, I'm at work by 6 o'clock. I get home at 4, and I cook dinner and do what I got to do. And then I'm right back at it. And so by 9 o'clock, I have to say, I've been trying to be consistent and really shut it down device-wise, because there's not enough time in the day to do everything I need to do. And, but that has helped me to sleep better, I will say. Yeah. I have slept much better. Like, I go to bed, I'm in the bed and asleep by 10. And I was waking up like 2:30 every night. And now I'm waking up more like 4:30, but I get up at 5. So that's much better than it has been in a long time. Absolutely. And for those of you who don't know my story, for 5 years, my tongue has been swollen and wouldn't go down. And I mean, they would keep me in ICU because they were so paranoid about how large my tongue was. And if I could show you a picture of how it was after leaving ICU and how it is now, you would be like, oh my goodness. So my tongue is down considerably just by implementing that. Thursday will be starting the 4th week.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And that's with two trips to Mayo Clinic and multiple other doctors as well.
Everywhere. Everywhere. I've even They were going to send me to Johns Hopkins. They wouldn't see my case because they didn't know what else to do for me. I went to Mayo Clinic twice in Minnesota. I went to Chapel Hill. I went to, I have done a FaceTime with the University of California at San Diego. And I am a puzzle to people, except Dr. Bartemus.
Yeah.
And the crowd goes wild.
Yeah, so that's exciting. Thank you for sharing. And
Yeah.
of course, my heavy lifting is figure it out. Yours is go do, right? So if you don't go do, it's just educational. So the fact that you're doing is what's creating these changes. And then the
And
goal,
I've lost 11 pounds.
11. Yeah.
Go, Rebecca.
Excellent.